My wife cheated on me with our neighbor, then secretly transferred $250, $0 inheritance into her sister's name before filing for divorce. Now she's claiming I need to pay her legal fees and full ownership of our family home. I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here, writing about how my wife, Lisa, turned out to be a total snake. Honestly, I thought we had a good life. Married for 7 years, 2 kids, a nice house in the suburbs, everything looked perfect from the outside. But then, one day, everything started falling apart in ways I never saw coming. It all blew up when I accidentally found out she was cheating on me with our neighbor, Jake. Yeah, Jake. The guy next door who always seemed just a little too friendly, but I never suspected he'd be capable of this. I mean, I knew Lisa was hot and she liked to flirt, but I thought she was just teasing or whatever. Turns out, she was screwing him behind my back for months. It started with small things. She began staying out late without telling me where she was going, claiming she was at book club or meeting up with her sister. But I noticed a pattern. She'd come home with a different attitude, more confident, a little more aggressive, like she was hiding something. I caught her once sneaking her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. I saw her typing something, then quickly locking her screen. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured maybe she was talking to a friend or planning something for the kids, but I kept an eye on her, just in case. One evening, I decided to check her phone while she was in the shower. I know it's invasive, but I was desperate to understand what was going on. I found messages, flirty, suggestive texts between her and Jake. Nothing explicit at first, just enough to make my stomach turn. They were talking about meeting up for a little fun, and she kept calling him babe. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I couldn't believe she'd do that to us. It was a punch to the face I didn't see coming. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and furious all at once. I confronted her the next morning. I told her I saw the messages and I wanted an explanation. Her reaction: she spun some bullshit about how I was paranoid, that Jake was just a good friend and I was imagining things. She called me insecure, said I was overreacting and that I was ruining our marriage over nothing. But her eyes, I saw the guilt there, the flicker of panic. She tried to deny everything, but I knew better. I had proof and I wasn't going to be played for a fool. Still, I was stunned. How could she lie so easily? How could she betray me like this after all we'd been through? That night, I lay awake replaying everything. The thought of her in Jake's arms, doing God knows what, made me sick. I felt a mixture of heartbreak and rage. I kept asking myself how I missed the signs, how I didn't see her slipping away from me. I'd always thought we had a solid marriage, but now I was questioning everything. It hurt knowing she'd been lying to me for months, sneaking around, pretending to be the perfect wife while she was out screwing our neighbor. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest over and over again. It was the kind of betrayal that changes everything, and I knew I had to do something. I just didn't know what yet. The next few days were a blur of anger, confusion, and a creeping sense of betrayal I couldn't shake. I started digging more into her phone, her emails, anything I could find. I needed answers, but honestly, I also needed to understand how deep this went. I found more messages, texts, pictures, even some videos of her and Jake fooling around. They weren't just talking anymore, they were having sex, I was sure of it. The worst part is she lied through her teeth about everything. She told me she was just friends with Jake, that he was harmless, that I was overreacting, but her phone said otherwise. One thing I noticed was the timing. She had been sneaking out late, always claiming she was at some book club, but her texts with Jake were mostly after midnight. The sex stuff was happening in secret, in the shadows. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind. I'd always trusted her, always believed we had a solid bond. Turns out I was just another fool who thought she was faithful. I felt sick thinking about all the nights I was sleeping next to her, completely oblivious while she was with him. Then came the worst part: money. I started noticing strange transactions in our joint account. Small charges here and there, but then I saw a big one, $250 transferred from our inheritance fund into her sister's account. That was a huge chunk of our savings, and it wasn't authorized or explained. I asked her about it and she just shrugged, saying it was an investment, that needed it for some business venture. I knew she was lying. I found out later she'd transferred that money secretly, probably to hide her assets, maybe to pay Jake off or just to get rid of her inheritance so I wouldn't have a claim on it. It hit me hard. She was not only cheating on me but also trying to set herself up to walk away with everything. The house, the money, everything we built, she was planning her escape and I was just a pawn in her game. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut 100 times. How could she do this to me? To our kids? All those years I worked hard, trusted her, and she was scheming behind my back. The betrayal cut deep, but what really angered me was her blatant lies, her manipulation. She was the queen of deception, and I was just a fool who believed her. I decided I had to confront her again. This time, not just about the affair, but everything. The money, the lies, the betrayal. I sat her down in the kitchen, the evidence laid out on my phone. I told her I knew about everything. The affair, the transfer, the secret meetings. Her face twisted into a sneer, and she started lying again, claiming I was crazy, that I was paranoid, that Jake was just a friend who was helping her with some personal issues. She called me controlling, insecure, and said she was sick of hiding her life from me. I could see the rage bubbling inside me. How dare she call me insecure when she's been screwing the neighbor and secretly stealing from us? Her excuses didn't hold water. I looked at her with a mixture of disgust and heartbreak. I realized then that this wasn't just about infidelity. It was about a complete breakdown of trust, a betrayal on every level. I felt like I was losing my mind, but I also knew I couldn't let her get away with it. I told her I'd be talking to a lawyer, that I was done playing her game. She scoffed, said I'd regret it, that I'd be paying her legal fees and covering everything. She even claimed she owned the house outright now because of some agreement she made with her sister. I couldn't believe her audacity. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything, the lies, the cheating, the money transfer, and I felt like I was watching my life fall apart. I trusted her and she'd used that trust to destroy us. I was angry, hurt, and confused, but I also knew I had to take control. I started planning my next move, knowing that whatever she was planning, I had to be ready for it. The betrayal was one thing, but her greed and deception made it even worse. I didn't want her to get away with it, not without a fight. Over the next few days, I threw myself into gathering everything I could. I spoke to a lawyer, an aggressive one who specialized in divorce and asset protection. I needed to understand my rights and how deep her schemes ran. What I learned was shocking. She had transferred the inheritance into her sister's name, claiming it was a favor, but the truth was she was trying to hide the money from me. The $250, $0, wasn't just some small amount she was hiding. It was a significant part of our family's future. And she had done it secretly, without my knowledge or consent. The lawyer confirmed what I suspected. She had no legal claim to the house anymore. She made some kind of agreement with her sister, who was always ready to help her manipulate the situation. Was in on it, I was sure of it now. The more I dug, the more I realized how deep her lies went. She'd been planning her escape for months, maybe even longer. I found emails where she discussed protecting her assets and getting out clean, always with help. I felt like I was living in some twisted crime story. Meanwhile, Lisa kept up her act, acting like everything was fine. She'd throw tantrums, call me crazy, accuse me of spying on her, and claim I was just jealous of Jake. She insisted she loved me, that it was just a mistake, and that I was overreacting. But her eyes told a different story. I saw the guilt, the desperation, the lies. She'd lie about where she was, who she was with, even what she spent money on. It was like dealing with a master manipulator, and I was starting to see her for what she really was, a selfish, greedy woman who'd do anything to protect her own ass. One night I caught her trying to transfer more money, this time into an offshore account. She thought she was so clever, hiding everything behind fake names and shell companies. That was the moment I knew I had to act fast. I contacted my lawyer again, and we started building a case to freeze her assets, especially the money she'd transferred out. I also hired a private investigator to look into her dealings with Jake, and I needed proof, hard evidence that would hold up in court. The emotional toll was brutal. Every day felt like walking a tightrope. I was furious at her betrayal, devastated that Marriage was over and scared about what the future would bring. I trusted her with everything, my love, my life, my money, and now I was losing it all. I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of betrayal, like I'd been punched in the chest repeatedly. How could she do this? How could she lie so effortlessly, manipulate her own family, and turn her back on everything we built? I'd never felt so broken and yet so determined to fight back. In the midst of all this chaos, she started claiming I owed her thousands in legal fees. She said I was dragging her through the mud, that I was trying to ruin her, and that I should pay her for all the trouble she'd gone through. That was her new game, playing the victim, twisting the story to make herself look innocent. But I knew better. I knew her lies, her greed, her manipulations. I was done being a passive victim. I decided I'd fight her every step of the way, not just for the house or the money, but for my dignity. I was sick of her lies, sick of her games, and I was ready to take her down. The more I uncovered, the more I realized this wasn't just about infidelity. It was about control, greed, and betrayal on a level I'd never imagined. I had to be smart, strategic, and relentless. I couldn't let her walk away with everything she wanted, because she'd already taken enough from me. I started documenting everything, texts, emails, bank statements, everything, to prepare for the inevitable legal battle. I knew she'd fight me tooth and nail, but I was determined to make her pay for what she'd done. This wasn't just about saving my marriage anymore. It was about justice. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Once I presented my evidence, proof of her affair, the illegal transfer of our inheritance, her attempts to hide assets, my lawyer managed to get a court order to freeze her accounts. That was a huge win, but I knew it wouldn't stop her from trying to spin things her way. She was already claiming I was the bad guy, saying I'd been controlling, that I'd pushed her into desperate measures. She actually had the nerve to accuse me of being paranoid when I presented her with her own messages. Meanwhile, Lisa's attitude only got more aggressive. She started calling me abusive, jealous, and a crazy husband who just can't accept that his wife wants to be free. She even tried to turn the kids against me, telling them I was mean and trying to take everything away from mommy. That was the lowest point. I saw her manipulating everyone around her to justify her actions. But I stayed focused on the facts. I knew she was lying, and I had the proof to back me up. Her next move was even more audacious. She filed for divorce, claiming I was emotionally abusive and that I'd refused to cooperate. But I had evidence she was the one cheating, hiding assets, and planning her escape. The court dismissed her claims pretty quickly, but it was clear she was trying to wear me down. She also demanded that I pay her legal fees, an amount that was staggering. She said I owed her because I was causing her emotional distress. I couldn't believe her audacity. She had no shame. At the same time, I discovered she'd been trying to transfer even more money, another $100, $0, into her sister's account, claiming it was for family support. But I knew better, was in on it, helping her sister hide assets. I also found out she was secretly negotiating with Jake behind my back, trying to get him to testify she was under duress or forced to do all this. I was furious. She was pulling out all the stops to save herself, but I refused to back down. One night I confronted her directly. I told her I knew everything about Jake, the money, her lies. I told her she'd lost my trust completely and that I was going to fight her for custody of the kids, the house, and every penny she tried to steal. She looked at me with contempt, her eyes cold and calculating. She said she didn't care what I did, that she was done pretending, and that she'd make sure I paid her legal fees. That's when I realized she was dead set on destroying me, not just for the money, but for control and revenge. The emotional toll was staggering. I'd been betrayed on every level, by the woman I loved, by her family, and even by the system that was supposed to protect us. I felt a deep sense of loss, but also a burning desire to come out on top. I couldn't let her win. I knew she was scheming to take everything she could, but I was determined to fight her to the end. I started preparing for the worst, knowing she'd pull out all the stops to get what she wanted, especially the house, which she claimed was joint property, even though I had legal proof otherwise. Throughout this nightmare, I couldn't help but ask myself how I didn't see it coming. How did I miss all the signs? How did I let her manipulate me into thinking everything was fine? The truth is, I was blinded by love, by the hope that things would get better. But now I see her for what she really is, a selfish, manipulative woman who'd do anything to save herself, even if it meant destroying her own family. I'm not saying it's easy to accept, but I know I have to keep fighting. I can't let her get away with this. Not after everything she's done. After months of legal battles, evidence gathering, and sleepless nights, I finally felt like I was gaining some ground. The court hearings were brutal, and Lisa's behavior only got more vindictive. She was trying to turn the kids against me, claiming I was an angry, controlling father, when all I wanted was to protect them from her lies. She insisted she owned the house outright, that I had no claim because of some secret agreement with her sister. But I had the legal documents proving otherwise, proof that she'd forged signatures, manipulated legal paperwork, and lied about her ownership. Her accusations about me being emotionally abusive were laughable. I knew she was just trying to make herself look innocent, but her own texts and emails betrayed her. She'd call me names, scream at me in front of the kids, and threaten to ruin me financially if I didn't back down. She even hired her own lawyer to push for full custody, claiming I was unstable. But I had witnesses, friends who saw her yelling, her own family members who confirmed her manipulative tactics. I was building a case to show her true character, and I was determined to win. Meanwhile, she kept trying to spin her story to the judge. She claimed she was forced to transfer the inheritance, that I was controlling and abusive, and that she was just trying to protect herself from me. The audacity of her lies made me sick. I had all the proof of her affair, the money transfers, her attempts to hide assets, and her manipulative behavior. I knew I'd win in the end, but it was exhausting. I couldn't believe I'd gone through so much just because I loved her once. One day, I found out she'd hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on me. She wanted to paint me as some kind of monster to justify her actions. Luckily, I had my own team of investigators, and I gathered enough evidence to disprove her claims. I had recordings of her plotting with, emails where she admitted to lying to the court, and even some proof that she'd been contacting Jake again, trying to get him to testify she was coerced. It was a battle of lies, but I knew the truth would come out. The biggest shock came when I learned she was trying to claim full ownership of our house, even though I had the original deed showing I was the sole owner. She was presenting fake documents, trying to manipulate the court into giving her everything. I felt a mix of rage and despair. How could she be so ruthless? She was willing to destroy her own family for money and revenge. I realized then that she'd gone beyond just cheating. She was set on completely ripping apart what was left of our life together. I also started to feel the emotional weight of everything. I was angry at her, yes, but also heartbroken. I'd loved her once, believed in our future, and now I was fighting to keep what was left of that. I was tired, physically and emotionally drained, but I refused to give up. I was determined to expose her lies, protect my children, and reclaim my life. Every night I'd lie awake, going over the case, wondering how I'd gotten here and what I could do to finally put an end to her manipulations. The final court hearing was approaching, and I knew this was the moment everything would either be resolved or spiral further out of control. I'd spent months fighting for my rights, for the truth, and for my dignity. I was ready. I had the evidence, the legal backing, and the resolve. I looked at her sitting there, smug and confident, and I realized she underestimated me. She thought her lies would win, but I knew the truth, and I was finally going to make sure it came out. It was time to end this nightmare and face whatever consequences came with it. The court date arrived faster than I'd expected, and I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. All the months of fighting, digging through lies, and gathering evidence had led to this moment. I sat in the courtroom, staring at Lisa across the room, her face cold, her eyes darting nervously. She thought she was going to walk out of there with everything she wanted, but I knew better now. I had everything laid out, proof of her affair, the illegal transfer of the inheritance, her attempts to manipulate the court, and her outright lies about ownership of the house. When the judge called the case, I presented my evidence meticulously. I showed the original deed, the bank statements, the threatening emails, and the proof of her contact with Jake. I explained how she had secretly transferred the inheritance to her sister, how she had been lying about her ownership of the house, and how she'd been trying to manipulate everyone with her false claims. I could see her squirming, her face pale, realizing her carefully constructed house of lies was crumbling. Lisa's lawyer tried to argue that she was just a victim of circumstance, but I cut her off. I laid out every lie, every betrayal, and every illegal act she'd committed. I told the court how she'd been cheating on me with Jake, how she'd transferred our money, and how she'd schemed with her sister to hide her assets. I explained how she'd tried to make herself the victim, but the evidence spoke for itself. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I saw the judge flipping through my documents, nodding slowly. In her final attempt, Lisa tried to claim full ownership of the house, insisting she'd bought it outright before we married. But I presented the original deed, which clearly showed I was the sole owner. I pointed out her forged signatures, the fake documents she'd submitted, and her attempts to manipulate the court. The judge looked at her with a mixture of disappointment and frustration. After hours of testimony, the judge finally rendered the verdict. Lisa was ordered to pay back the transferred inheritance, cover her own legal fees, and relinquish any claim to the house. She was also ordered to pay damages for the emotional distress caused by her affair and her manipulative tactics. She sat there, stunned, realizing her plans had failed. Her facade of control cracked, and she looked at me with pure hatred. As I left the courtroom, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, but also an ache in my heart. I'd lost my marriage, my trust, and nearly everything I'd worked for, but I gained my dignity back. I learned that sometimes you have to fight tooth and nail for the truth, even when it feels impossible. I realized that betrayal cuts deep, but resilience and honesty are stronger. I took my kids to see a counselor, started rebuilding my life piece by piece, and vowed never to let anyone manipulate me again. Lisa's lies and greed cost her everything: her marriage, her home, her reputation. I hope she finally understands that betrayal comes with consequences. For me, it's the end of a painful chapter, but also the start of something new, something built on truth, strength, and the hope that someday I'll find peace again.